Well, good morning, church. Thank you for joining us for our daily Devo. Today we're in Matthew chapter 16, verses 1 to 12. Now, hopefully you have read the passage. If not, really easy. Just hit pause, go read the passage, and come back. If you have read it, you know how it starts off. The Pharisees, Sadducees, come to Jesus and demand from him a sign to prove he has the authority to say the things he's saying. Kind of amazing. They're demanding of Jesus. Of course, Jesus tells them no, and he says only an adulterous generation would want a sign. And he says, you guys, you can read the weather, and you can't even read what God's doing around you. He goes on with the disciples and he leaves, and the disciples are talking about bread. So I think he sees it as a teaching point, and he mentions that they need to avoid the yeast of the Pharisees. Well, they take that somebody's getting in trouble for not bringing bread. They start to argue, and Jesus just, I'm sure he goes, dumb disciples. He's like, guys, don't you get it? I can take a loaf of bread and feed thousands. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about avoiding what the Pharisees had. And what was it? The Pharisees' issue was, they were the arbiters of spiritual truth in that day. And they did good things. They studied Scripture. They taught Scripture. They gave. They served. They were an important place. The problem was their exercise of connection to God had went from a personal, private relationship with them and God to something on the surface level. Jesus called them hypocrites. It can be translated actors. Probably the literal term means mask wearers. It comes from the idea of the Greek actors that wear the tragedy mask that was sad, or the happy mask, and you could tell what part they played by the mask they wore. And what the Pharisees had done, they went from an authentic relationship with God to a mask, to something they projected for people to see. And they were far more concerned with what people saw than what God saw. And see, he warns the apostles, the disciples about this. And that's so important because it wouldn't be long from now that the disciples will become the arbiters of spiritual truth. They're the ones that will write the Bible, or they'll be the eyewitnesses to those who write the Bible. When there's issues that have to be settled in the church, guess where they'll go? They'll go to the apostles who will make the decision. And he wanted to make sure that though they were arbiters of truth, they knew all this information, he wanted them to be careful that the yeast, that little bit, wouldn't come in and mess up everything when they become more concerned about what people would see than what God would see. See, he was more concerned about the transformation of the heart than the actions everyone else was looking at. And see, I think the application for that is, for us is that we need to be far more concerned with what God is doing here and what God sees than what the world around us sees. And we need to be careful to not somehow think like the Pharisees. As long as it looks impressive, it's great. Jesus talked about the Pharisees, that they were like whitewashed tombs. On the outside, everything looked great, but on the inside was dead bones. They were like a cup. On the outside, it was pristine, but on the inside, it was full of crud. And what we do matters. What other people see matters. But you know what God is more concerned with is what's in the heart. And it's for us to keep a real dynamic connection to him. One that's real, one that's not just public, but one that's private and passionate with him. Guys, thank you so much for continuing on our daily Devo. I hope you have an awesome day, and we're so glad you're part of this journey with us.